So I'm gonna take you through the steps on how to make one of my face masks. The first step would be to serge each long end of the piece of fabric. If you don't have a serger, then just turn and fold, top stitch, or serge it like I do. So snip your serging edges. Okay. Now you can finger press, fold about 1/2 inch of fabric, and then we'll sew at 1/4 inch. So you can choose to use your iron to press, but to make it faster, I just generally use my fingers. Be sure to backstitch at the top and the bottom. Okay, and do the same to the other side. Okay, so now you're gonna fold the right sides of the fabric, have the meat at the top, and then we're gonna sew in about 1.5 inches on each side. Be sure to back tack a couple times when you end to make sure that those don't open, because that's gonna be our pocket opening. So we're gonna sew this at about 3/4 inch from the edge. And again, you're gonna sew about 1.5 inches in. Now, I usually back tack a couple times just to really make sure that that edge is enforced. Okay, and then we're gonna do that to the other end. So that's how far we got there. Now we're gonna start 1.5 inches inwards, back tack a couple times. Okay. So go ahead and trim your loose threads. Okay, so here is where we'll insert our elastic. So go ahead and fold over. So we see this is this seam here. Now we're gonna make a fold about 1/2 inch above that line. And I do another little finger press. And what I also like to do to make sure that your elastic is in the right place, I do a tiny little notch at the corners of where you want your elastic sewn into. Okay, so now we can take your elastic that's pre-cut for you and If you can do it without pinning, that's great. I usually do have to put some pins in the top and bring that end to where you have made your notch. So that's why I do that. Just makes it a little easier. Okay. Now when you're sewing, you know, it'll kind of want to bunch up a little, so just pull it taut as you sew, making sure that the elastic isn't twisted. And now we're going to sew at 1/4 of an inch. And again, back tacking at the top and the bottom to make sure that our elastic is secure. We're going to do the same thing to the other side now. So keeping that fold spacing consistent with the other side. Plug in that elastic. And again, pulling the bottom of the elastic to where you made your little notch. See that? That's our little marker. And we'll plug that in. And again, 1/4 of an inch while keeping the seams pulled taut. Go ahead and snip your ends. So now what we have here is the inside out version of the mask. Now use the pocket opening to pull it right side out. Pull the elastic to make sure that your corners are nice and square. And here we're going to take to the ironing board. So as you press, make sure everything is nice and straight. When you get to the edges, make sure that your edges are pulled out. Otherwise, if you leave this folded in too far, then you're going to lose some of your mask. So make sure that that seam is pulled out all the way, nice and pressed. So this side is the back side of the mask. So I always press it, leaving a tiny little overhang, so when you turn it to the front, you don't see that other side of the fabric. So try to be aware of that. Do the same thing on the other side. Okay. Now, this is the right side of the fabric here, the right side of the mask. So we'll give this another little once over. And here is where we can fold in our pleats. So the top pleat is generally around 1.5 inches. If you can do this all in one step, that's great. You might have to press along each pleat. I try to do all 3 pleats in one to make it go a little faster, but just making sure that they're very symmetrical with one another. So press that. Really make sure that your pleats are hugging up right next to each other, making sure there's no spaces like that, because that will cause the mask to be too big. So make sure that they're all nice and tight with one another. Okay? And they should be about 4 inches tall. So as long as your pleating matches that, then you'll be okay. Okay, so now we're ready to top stitch along the edges and add our wire. So I've included these little wires. Tuck in up into your opening the wire. Make sure that the flat side of the wire is going to be the side that's on the inside of the mask, so it doesn't cause a bump on your nose. So what I mean by that is this is the top side of the wire. It has a ridge. The other side is nice and flat. So make sure that that flat side is what's going to be resting on the inside of your nose. So we have that in its location. Just center it. It's a little shorter than the length of the mask, so just make sure it's nice and center. And then just encapsulate the wire, making sure you're not going to run over the wire and mess up your machine. So make sure to give some back tacks at the top. About 3 to 4 stitches in, you're going to pivot. Okay. And making sure, okay, we've got our whole wire in there. And now again, give this a good couple back tacks. Make sure it's not going to come out at the top. Trim away your thread. The same on the other side. My machine nests a little bit, so pull those out. Trim that up. And then all you have to do is reinstate your folds, and then on the side, again at about a 1/4 of an inch, we're going to sew along the side, making sure that your pleats stay very tucked into each other. They'll want to spread here, so keep an eye on them. Once you get to the bottom, pivot, flip it back up. Back tack. We'll do the same on the other side. And making sure your pleats stay very lined up in a very nice straight row. Pivot. Back tuck again at the bottom. Cut your threads. On the other side. This is actually a little bit bigger than 1/4 of an inch. So make sure you get a little bit closer to the edge. I did it too far down. So we'll want to sew it about right there. Okay. And there you have it. Get rid of your loose threads. There you are.